The Vatican stands as the wealthiest religious institution globally, boasting an array of art, magnificent basilicas, and priceless treasures that could rival entire national museums. Its financial operations quietly manage billions of dollars, and its influence stretches from the towering skyscrapers of Wall Street to the most impoverished villages around the world. Yet, what many may overlook is the fact that this empire of wealth was not simply bestowed from above. It was meticulously constructed over centuries. Like any significant fortune in history, its foundation was laid not merely on faith but intertwined with money, power, and transactions that might astonish even the most devout believers. This narrative isn't solely about theology. It intricately weaves into the realms of economics. The Vatican's journey from a spiritual movement to a formidable financial empire illustrates how money became the lifeblood of religion itself. This transformation began when Christianity gained legitimacy in 313 AD, following Roman Emperor Constantine's issuance of the Edict of Milan. This decree legalized Christianity and ended centuries of persecution against its followers. In an instant, what had been a small underground faith blossomed into the state religion of the Roman Empire. With this newfound legitimacy came generous offerings. The popes had transitioned from being simple shepherds of souls to becoming princes, lords, and bankers in their own right. Like all rulers concerned with maintaining their influence, they needed substantial funds, not just for feeding the impoverished or maintaining churches but also for financing armies, patronizing artists, and asserting dominance over rival monarchs. A testament to these ambitions was St. Peter's Basilica. The medieval church, originally erected by Constantine centuries earlier, was now crumbling and in dire need of replacement. By the 16th century, popes envisioned constructing a new basilica so grandiose and magnificent that it would overshadow all other religious structures in Christendom. However, such grandeur came at an exorbitant price. To fund this ambitious project, the Vatican doubled down on its indulgence sales strategy. Preachers traveled across Europe tirelessly selling certificates that promised to shorten one's time in purgatory, a promise that many found hard to resist. The marketing strategies employed were brazenly unapologetic as they capitalized on people's fears regarding salvation and eternal damnation. This era marked a pivotal intersection between faith and finance where spirituality became entangled with economic gain, an intricate dance between lofty ideals and earthly ambitions that would shape European history for generations to come. A Dominican monk by the name of Johann Tetzel made a proclamation that continues to reverberate through history. As soon as the coin clinks in the chest, a soul escapes from purgatory. This statement struck fear into the hearts of simple peasants who were anxious about the fate of their loved ones. Convinced that they were purchasing salvation, they willingly parted with their hard-earned coins. However, indulgences served a dual purpose beyond merely funding the church's endeavors. They also supported an extravagant lifestyle among the clergy. The popes of the Renaissance era lived in opulence befitting royalty. Alexander VI, infamous for his ties to the Borgia family, transformed the papal palace into a den of nepotism, luxury, and scandal. Meanwhile, Leo X of the Medici dynasty squandered vast sums on art, lavish feasts, and grand festivals while the impoverished citizens of Rome struggled to survive. The irony was palpable. Even as sermons condemned greed as sinful, the Vatican flaunted its wealth in a manner that would incite envy among monarchs. Behind closed doors, the papacy adopted a new instrument of power: banking. Although officially denouncing usury, the practice of lending money at interest as immoral, popes covertly collaborated with prominent banking families across Italy, from Lombard to Medici, to manage and amplify their riches. The papal court became not only a center for ecclesiastical income but also a hub for royal debts. Kings owed money to bankers; those bankers were bound by allegiance to Rome, creating an intricate web where the Vatican sat at the center of European finance and authority. Yet every financial bubble eventually bursts. This one did so with explosive consequences. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther boldly affixed his 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, vehemently denouncing indulgences as fraudulent schemes. He argued that salvation could not be bought and that the church had turned faith into a marketplace, a reality built on the desperation of the poor. His actions ignited the Reformation movement, splitting Europe into two distinct factions almost overnight. Suddenly, indulgences, once a lucrative source of revenue for the Vatican, transformed into symbols of corruption so egregious that entire nations began to sever ties with Rome. The irony was striking. The very funds that financed St. Peter's Basilica, the crown jewel of Catholicism, also sparked a rebellion that shattered its monopoly over Christianity. Wealth had cultivated prestige but also sowed seeds of outrage. And outrage is one currency no empire can control. By the 17th century, despite still possessing vast tracts of land and immense wealth, the Vatican's aura had suffered irreparable damage due to the Reformation. Its authority was no longer unquestionable or absolute. Nevertheless, it retained its age-old formula: public displays of faith coupled with private accumulation of wealth. Like all great powers throughout history, it adapted to changing circumstances while preserving core elements of its strategy. Noble families began donating vast tracts of land, while emperors showered the church with privileges and treasures. Notably, Constantine himself funded the construction of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, sending a clear message: wealth and sanctity could coexist harmoniously. From that moment forward, the church internalized a crucial lesson known to every empire throughout history. Money equates to power, and power invariably requires financial backing. Even after losing a significant portion of its European loyalty, the Vatican found innovative ways to transform faith into a form of balance. For centuries, the wealth of this religious institution was derived from land, tithes, and indulgences, forming a robust financial foundation. However, in the 19th century, this empire faced a profound collapse. In 1870, the Papal States, extensive territories in central Italy directly controlled by the Church, were seized by the newly unified Italian nation. In an instant, the Pope was stripped of his lands, rents, and armies. The Vatican transitioned from being a territorial empire to a spiritual one, leading many to believe that its financial influence had come to an end. Yet history reveals that institutions built upon monetary foundations seldom relinquish their grasp on wealth so easily. The Vatican's resurgence occurred in 1929 through one of the most underrated agreements of the 20th century: the Lateran Treaty. Benito Mussolini sought to secure papal support for his fascist regime and thus established a pact with the Vatican. This agreement granted sovereignty over Vatican City to the Church, but, more crucially, it provided substantial compensation for its lost territories: 750 million lire in cash along with 1 billion lire in government bonds. Adjusted for inflation today, these amounts would equate to billions of dollars. The Church experienced a remarkable turnaround from near financial ruin to unexpected prosperity, aided by a dictator who needed its blessing. With this newfound wealth, the Vatican established a sophisticated financial apparatus known as the Institute for Religious Works, commonly referred to as the Vatican Bank. Officially tasked with managing funds for religious orders and charitable organizations, it quickly evolved into a shadowy financial hub operating discreetly and largely without oversight. This institution soon became deeply intertwined with global politics. During the Cold War era, Vatican funds were instrumental in supporting anti-communist movements worldwide. The events of the 1980s further complicated its reputation when it became embroiled in scandals surrounding Banco Ambrosiano, a banking institution linked to vast sums that mysteriously disappeared. Roberto Calvi, often dubbed God's banker, was discovered hanged beneath Blackfriars Bridge in London, with bricks stuffed into his pockets. His death was ruled as murder amid swirling rumors connecting the Vatican Bank to organized crime syndicates and intelligence agencies, while engaging in money laundering schemes that continue to haunt its legacy. The irony of this situation is strikingly evident. An institution that preaches poverty and humility has mastered dark financial arts better than most corporations. The juxtaposition between its spiritual mission and intricate financial dealings raises profound questions about morality and accountability within such venerable organizations. As history unfolds, it remains critical to examine how power dynamics interplay with faith and finances in shaping not only national policies but also international relations on a grand scale. It amassed its wealth through land ownership and indulgences, subsequently revitalizing it via contracts and banking systems, all while shrouding itself in layers of secrecy that would impress even the most powerful titans of Wall Street. Amidst brewing scandals, from Ambrosiano to accusations involving money laundering by organized crime, this institution remained too sanctified to face collapse. Today, the true extent of Vatican wealth remains a mystery cloaked in enigma. Its priceless collections of art, including Michelangelo's breathtaking Sistine Chapel and Raphael's exquisite frescoes, cannot be sold yet hold valuations reaching into the billions. The vast land holdings and investments are immense as well, hidden behind complex institutional structures designed for obfuscation. Officially, the Vatican claims to operate on a modest annual budget. However, anyone who has delved into history understands that appearances can be deceiving. What is visible often serves as an illusion, a mere tool of power. The lesson here is profound. The wealth of the Vatican did not simply materialize from thin air. It was meticulously crafted, accumulated, and safeguarded using the same mechanisms that have built every empire throughout history: taxation, land acquisition, indulgences, treaties, and financial institutions. This wealth flourished by selling salvation, taxing believers, forging alliances with monarchs and dictators, manipulating financial flows much like modern governments and corporations engage in today. This narrative transcends matters of faith. It is fundamentally about the machinery of power. This understanding holds significant relevance even now because the Vatican is not an isolated case. Every system that urges you to place your trust in its promises while quietly enriching itself plays the same game. Whether it is a government assuring you of currency stability while printing it into worthlessness, a corporation preaching values while exploiting its workers, or a bank vowing security while leveraging your deposits, this formula remains unchanged. On the surface lies faith. Beneath it lies capital. As Europe transitioned into the early Middle Ages, the Church unveiled one of its most significant financial innovations: tithing. Believers were mandated to contribute 10% of their earnings to the Church, a steady income stream flowing from peasant fields into parish coffers and then ascending to bishops and ultimately to Rome itself. Picture a medieval farmer struggling to sustain his family yet still bound by obligation to surrender a tenth of his grain harvest to the Church. Failure to comply could jeopardize his soul's salvation. This was no act of charity. Rather, it resembled a religiously sanctioned tax system. Over countless generations, these tithes transformed the Church into Europe's largest landholder. Therefore, when gazing upon the opulent halls of the Vatican, do not limit your perspective to religion alone. Acknowledge an ancient lesson in financial history. Wealth gathered in shadows invariably wears a mask of virtue. Always remember that whenever you are encouraged to trust a system, it is crucial to question who truly benefits from your belief. While history may not repeat itself verbatim, if you fail to comprehend its lessons, you risk being crushed by its weight. If this revelation has granted you fresh insight into these dynamics at play within powerful institutions throughout time and their interactions with society at large, consider how this knowledge could affect your understanding moving forward. History possesses answers that can illuminate dark corners. Understanding where to seek them can empower individuals against manipulation. By the year 1000, estimates suggest that the Catholic Church owned nearly 1/3 of all land across Western Europe. Not just cathedrals and monasteries, but also fertile agricultural lands, sprawling vineyards, bustling mills, and vast forests. These tangible assets generated genuine wealth long before modern banking systems or bonds emerged on the scene. However, as time progressed, it became apparent that land ownership and tithes alone were insufficient to satisfy the ever-expanding demands of this burgeoning institution. The quest for resources grew increasingly insatiable as new challenges arose in maintaining its opulence and influence across Europe. By the 11th century, the Church had devised a potent financial strategy: indulgences. The concept was straightforward, yet the marketing tactics employed were extraordinarily effective. By contributing to the Church, individuals could reduce their own punishment for sins or even lessen the penalties faced by deceased relatives in the afterlife. It was a form of salvation that could be purchased, and it turned out to be incredibly lucrative. Vast sums of gold flowed into the coffers of the Vatican, financing not only ecclesiastical endeavors but also military campaigns. At that point in history, the Church had evolved far beyond its role as a mere religious institution. It had become a significant geopolitical entity. The Crusades, which began in the year 1096, were remembered as holy wars, but they also served as a remarkable financial boon. Armies required substantial funding, prompting the Church to implement new taxes to cover these costs. For those crusaders who could not afford to fight, an alternative was offered. They could simply purchase indulgences instead. As cities fell under siege and treasures were seized, Lands were declared as properties of both faith and papacy. By the conclusion of the Crusades, the Vatican wielded not only spiritual authority but also military and financial clout that rivaled that of kings. This situation revealed a profound irony. While priests preached about poverty and humility from their pulpits, the Vatican was amassing wealth on a scale that surpassed any monarch's treasury. Ordinary families listened intently to sermons warning against greed, while simultaneously witnessing the church accumulate riches beyond compare. This dynamic is often observed throughout empires. A moral narrative presented to the populace contrasted sharply with an underlying financial engine driving their society. By late medieval times, the Vatican had transformed from merely being a landowner into a sophisticated financier. By the Renaissance era, it had established itself as a center of both financial and political power.